Welcome to GoPowerCat.com's PowerChat. I'm publisher Tim Fitzgerald, and we're sponsored by Blue Mark Energy. Chris Klieman was hired to replace the legendary Bill Snyder last December. And now with his first football season as Kansas State's coach just around the corner, we sat down to talk. We didn't talk a whole lot of football, but we hope you get to know Chris Klieman a lot better. Here's the PowerChat with Chris Klieman. Welcome to another edition of the Power Chat. As I mentioned earlier, Chris Klieman. Hopefully everyone recognizes you by now. I mean, what a whirlwind it's been since your hire. It's been nonstop.
It really has. I cannot believe we're at the end of July, and it seems like just yesterday we were 1st of January, and I don't know where the time has gone. But in the same respect, I'm excited to get things started here in August.
Yeah, it's been a remarkable 7 months, and we've got a lot of ground to cover today, but I want to go back to growing up in Waterloo, Iowa. That seems like about as an American upbringing as you could get.
Oh, it definitely was. Middle class home. Mother was a teacher. Dad was a sporting goods salesman that was a football coach turned sporting goods salesman, and John Deere was huge in the heyday when I was growing up as a kid, and had factories and stuff around, and didn't live on a farm, but had a bunch of people that I was friends with in high school and grade school that lived on farms, and so it was a great upbringing, that's for sure.
Yeah, I'm also the son of a football coach turned something else to provide for a family, so I completely understand that. Columbus Catholic High School, your QB and defensive back. Looking back, were you the better high school QB or defensive back?
Well, we were at a school that was not the biggest of classifications, and so we had most of the guys play both ways. And I was fortunate that they gave me the ball as a freshman and said learn how to play the position, and had some people help me out along the way. And I knew that wasn't going to be my position in college if I chose to play football. And probably about my sophomore year, I kind of realized that football was something that I wanted to continue on with, and I enjoyed competing no matter what position I was playing. And lo and behold, I got to play both ways. But knew at the end of the day in high school that defensive back was probably going to be my calling in college.
What does one do growing up in Waterloo?
Just like every other typical kid, had lots of parks around and played a lot of sandlot baseball, where you just find 10 guys and get teams of 5 and play, or go down to Burns Park and play some basketball, and just did every outdoor activity. I never had a phone in my hand, just like you. We never had phones, and I just somebody'd have to drive down to say, hey, maybe it's time to come home, or you grab a sandwich at noon and come back at 6 or 7 for dinner, and then go back out again. I loved it. I kind of miss those days of just going out and playing ball and enjoying yourself.
Back then, our parents would just, here's your bike, go, see you later, get out of my hair, go do your thing, don't eat lead paint.
That's exactly right, and that's everybody trusted you, and you just, as long as you made good decisions, you could keep that trust. And I was fortunate; I was surrounded by some good friends that just loved sports like I did, and so that's all we did all day long. And in the summers, you got to the end of July, and you're like, oh, I got to go back to school. We got to get a few more games in, and but I had a blast and still stay in contact with a lot of the childhood friends and high school friends that played sports with.
You wrecked bikes. Like you said, you played a lot of sports. I think in some ways that's missing, and not just playing sports, but without adults. You know, without the parents there, without a coach there, just go and have fun and the joy of the game.
Yeah.
I think a lot of kids growing up now don't have that.
Yeah, and they're specializing, and I'm not a big specialization guy. I was around Carson Wentz, and he played, I think, 4 or 5 sports at Bismarck High School, and that wasn't that long ago, but that's what everybody did. You just played in the school that I was at. You had to play multiple sports. If not, we may not have enough to have full teams and JV teams and those things. And so no, I really enjoyed that. And you're right, there was very seldom did you have a ton of people at your Sandlot event, and maybe a parent would come down to give everybody a little popsicle or something. That was about it.
Yep, you had to sort it out yourselves.
That's right.
Now, the first step of the serendipity of your hiring here was you met Bill Snyder at a football camp. Was that at an Iowa football camp?
It was. I was going into my junior year of high school, and it's difficult in the state of Iowa because I was a baseball player and I loved playing baseball, but the high school season is during the summer.
That's weird.
It's one of the few, I think there's maybe 2 states in the land that do it this way. So I left our baseball team for a few days, which I hated to do because I was always wanting to compete, but I wanted to go to the University of Iowa football camp. And Hayden Fry was in his heyday in the mid-'80s there, and boy, what a great staff, you know, with the Stoops boys and McCarney and Alvarez and Coach Snyder. And
it's incredible.
Yeah, and so I went up there honestly on my own. Dad pulled up, dropped me off, said I'll see you in 3 days, and that was that, and stayed in the residence hall there, and went to camp, and a lot of quarterbacks in line, but absolutely I was at the camp with Coach Snyder, and threw the ball around and had him evaluate me, and then I went to the defensive backs because I was doing both, and but it was just cool for me to be around all those great coaches that if I was going to stay in college and just be a college football player, I wanted to gain as much knowledge as I could. And you talk about a phenomenal staff, and it was really good back then. Now you look back and say, wow, look at all those things those guys did. But I was a Northeast Iowa guy, and of course we had Iowa and Iowa State in our state, but everybody in Northeast Iowa was a Hawkeye, and so I grew up really enjoying Iowa and had a blast at the camps.
And up in Northern Iowa, how did that process break down?
Just hometown. Daryl Mudra was my college coach, and Daryl Mudra was nicknamed Dr. Victory, and coached from the press box. Not very many people know that. He coached every game from the press box. And so, I had an opportunity to walk on at Iowa State, and Northern Iowa came in and offered me a scholarship, and my family needed those financial resources, and so chance to play close to home, knew some of the guys that were on the team, had played against some guys, and then I thought they did a really good job building relationships and recruiting.
How long did it take you to realize I can play here, I can get this done?
Well, I was hopeful. I mean, like everybody, and I think that's the great thing about even kids today, the competitive side of things. I was hoping I could play early on. I mean, that was one of the goals I had. I didn't want a red shirt. I wanted to play right away. I didn't know how hard it was going to be, but I wanted to play right away. And I was on the 3rd or 4th team the first couple weeks of fall camp, and we had a scrimmage, and I think I made some plays and did some good things. Next thing you know, a Monday before the first game of the season, I'm penciled in as a starting defensive back playing corner, which I knew I wasn't a corner, but because I just understood the game, I think, pretty well, and that was the spot that they were needing some young players. So I started at corner my first 6, 7, 8 games of my freshman year, and I felt like I could belong at that level. Some growing pains, obviously, like everybody has as a freshman, but I had reached one of my goals, which was to play early.
Did Chris Klieman have corner speed, even if it was
Boy,
1AA level?
Yeah, exactly right. That's what, yeah, it was 1986 level or 87 level is what it would be, but no, absolutely not. I was trying to stay as deep as the deepest, but I always prided myself on being a really good tackler and knowing where we were supposed to fit. And I was glad about game 8 when they said, you know what, we're going to move you to free safety. And game 8, they moved me to free safety, and I stayed there the rest of my time.
That's nice. And Of course, step two is serendipity, is you're on the '89 team. That was Bill Snyder's first home game as coach of the Wildcats. He had opened on the road, but the Panthers come in and win 10-8. What do you remember of that game?
Not a ton.
Yeah, I wouldn't either.
No, not. I mean, some guys can go play by play and stuff. I remember what a huge win was it for us, because we had lost the week before to a Division II team, and we thought we were gonna have a pretty good team, and then all of a sudden, maybe we fell in love with ourselves and we go 0-1 and lose to a Division II team. Think, boy, we're in trouble. Well, we regrouped, and I think we ended up finishing 8-3 that year. But the win over Kansas State, just kind of just led us into a pretty good season. And it was our head coach Terry Allen's first game or first season as a head coach. So he lost in his first game, and then ends up going down to Manhattan and getting a win. But not a huge crowd, I remember. Not a big crowd, but it was still, to all of us, hey, we're getting a chance to play against a Big 8 team.
Yep.
You're getting a chance to play big-time football. And I think everybody has a chip on your shoulder when you have that opportunity, and our guys made the most of it.
It's interesting because it gives you a perspective that a lot of guys coming in from the outside may not have, that you saw what Bill Snyder started with and how far he had to go and how bad it was when he arrived. I've always told people, you pick the worst team in college in Power 5 football right now, and they'd beat those K-State teams in the late 80s by multiple touchdowns. That's how bad it was. So you have that perspective.
Yeah, it really was, and I didn't realize it then because we played in '86 and it was a worse team.
They were horrible.
When I was a true freshman, we came down here in '86 and we won. I think Stan was maybe the coach, and I know it was worse in '86 than it was in '89, and it wasn't much better. But you're right. I think that's what is so remarkable about the legacy, the story, the journey of people see what it was in the '90s and the 2000s, how phenomenal it was, how far they had come, and it was best coaching job in college football history.
Stan Parrish is an intriguing character when you look at him as a coach. He's got the 1 AA ring from Marshall. I believe he's got a Super Bowl ring. He's got a college national championship ring, and yet at Kansas State he really, really struggled. And in fairness, there were zero resources to accomplish these things. Luckily, you don't have that problem. Coach Snyder changed everything. But when did you know, I want to coach? This is what I want to do?
Oh, probably through that '89 and '90 season, my junior and senior season. That it was something that I had a passion for. I knew I wasn't talented enough to play and in the NFL at the next level, and had a lot of injuries throughout college anyway. And I just said, well, I need to stay involved in this game in some respect. And so I know after the '90 season, which was my last year, I went to Coach Allen and said, hey, is there a spot left? Because I graduated in December. Is there a spot left? And and maybe be a volunteer or whatever. And he said, well, let's try to figure something out, because I think he saw something in me that I might be able to help. And I know he visited with Bob Bowlesby, who was the athletic director at the time. And Bob Bowlesby, who was friends of ours, family friends, my mother and his mother were dear friends, said, yeah, we're going to create another spot. I think there's something special in this kid that I think he could be a coach someday, and let's give him a start. And so Bob Bowlesby created another spot for me to become a graduate assistant.
Nice. No, it's
come full circle then last week at the Big 12 media day that I give up Bob a big hug, and he just looks at me and he kind of shakes his head, because when I signed my national letter of intent in 1986 at Columbus, was when you could go out and have coaches, anybody could go out and have the letter of intent signed. And Bob Bowlesby was at Columbus High School with my parents and I signing our national letter of intent. And so Bob and I still get a chuckle out of that he was with me when I signed my national letter of intent, and he's with me on my first day as the Big 12 media day as the head coach.
What did Pops say when your dad, when he said, I'm going to go into coaching, and he's probably thinking, I've been there, done that, I imagine he was encouraging, but probably cautious.
He was, because he knew the passion that I had for it. And had I not, I'd probably been in sporting goods, because my brother's a national sales manager in the sporting goods business. My dad's was in the sporting goods business for a long time. So that was probably avenue B for me. But he wanted me to exhaust this avenue to say, okay, is this what you have a passion for it? I think it's something that if you continue to work at it, you have a chance to be pretty good at. And but it's I know how hard it is. I mean, I was a young coach not making any money, and then all of a sudden you get married, and all of a sudden you have a child, and you're still not making any money. It's difficult on a family.
And as a young coach, you go with Terry Allen to Kansas for a year.
Mm-hmm.
You got to feel like, oh, it's rolling now.
Well, yeah, I went from Northern Iowa as a graduate assistant to Western Illinois as my first full-time job, and went to Western Illinois and spent a few years there with Randy Ball. And then Terry left Northern Iowa, got the KU job, and invited me to come. And so, yeah, it's just kind of strange how things happen for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't regret one of the decisions I made in coaching, and I bounced around a lot as a younger coach, but that's how I believe you build your network. You continue to learn more about yourself. You continue to challenge yourself, and that's what you have to do. I always tell the young coaches around that ask me, do as many things as you can, meet as many people as you can, go to the conventions, go sit at clinics. People think clinics are why would I want to go do that? You go and sit and you listen. You don't just go sit and drink beer with everybody. You go and listen and go up and introduce yourself to whoever spoke. And you just never know when you maybe trigger something with somebody. And it's all about networking in this business.
And you eventually end up at Loras College as a assistant coach, and
Yep.
you get 1 year as a head coach.
Yep.
What did you take away from that experience?
It was phenomenal in the fact that it was an hour and 15 minutes from my hometown in Waterloo, where I was at Dubuque, Iowa. The president there is still a good friend of mine today, Jim Collins, dear friend, and he offered me the head job, but I knew it was going to be hard. There's no scholarships in Division III, and this was 2005, and it was close to $40,000 a year, and the recruiting was difficult. You were nonstop. It's very similar to what it is now, of being 365 24/7. You're just doing it without scholarships. But I was in charge of the equipment room. I was in charge of the field house where they played basketball games and setting up the field house. You did everything. Mm-hmm. And you were in charge, total charge of the travel budget and the financial aid and academics. You were everything, and you wore a lot of hats. But in the same respect, what a great learning curve it was for me to have all those things thrown on me as a relatively young person. But I really enjoyed that year. Loved the kids. Still communicate with a number of those guys. You talk about guys that play for the love of the game. That was what those guys did, and I had a blast with those guys. And but I also knew that ultimately I was going to get back to scholarship football and continue to try to make the climb.
And purple.
Yeah,
it's kind of funny. I was doing the research, and I'm like, well, UNI is purple, and then Loras is purple.
Yep.
My father, Pat Fitzgerald, ironically, was from Casey, Illinois, and they were purple. Went to Evansville before Korea, purple. Came back from Korea, Northwestern, purple. So it's, but here you are, more purple. That's
right.
It's just, it's very strange. All the little things that have lined up for you to end up in this position. It really is pretty remarkable. You go back to Northern Iowa
Mm-hmm.
to coach defensive backs.
Yep.
And that, as reviewing your career, that kind of seems to me like when it started to click.
Yeah.
You go to Northern Iowa, you're there, 4 seasons or so?
Mm-hmm.
Who's coach at that point?
Mark Farley's the head coach at that time. Had some really good football teams. I went there in 2006. They'd played in the national championship game in 2005. Went there in 2006 and went as the defensive back coach because I wanted to get back into scholarship football, and Mark gave me that opportunity. I played with Mark at Northern Iowa, so I've known him for a long time. He was at KU, so I knew Mark for years and years. And then we had really good teams in 07, 08. We were the number 1 seed, I think, in 07, went undefeated. But I was with our defensive staff consisted of myself, Scott Frost, who's at Nebraska, Jerry Montgomery, who's the defensive line coach with the Green Bay Packers now, and we had a blast. And we were all young, but we were all having fun and had a great bunch of guys. And but I also was sitting in the same room with Frosty and Jerry, and I'm like, these guys aren't going to last here. They're not long to stay at Northern Iowa, as intelligent as those guys were, as well as how well they motivated guys and stuff. And slowly but surely, first Jerry left, then Frosty left, and then after the 2010 season, I was the defensive coordinator in co-DC in 7, and then DC in 8, 9, and 10. I just said I have to continue to grow, and I just felt myself being a little stagnant, and so somebody reached out to me from North Dakota State and asked if I had an interest in going to North Dakota State, and I'd heard so many things about North Dakota State from one, Daryl Mudra, who was my original coach in 86 and 87, was the first guy to win a national championship at North Dakota State in 1965. The defensive coordinator that I had at Northern Iowa in 89 and 90, Ardell Wiegand, was one of the best two-way players that North Dakota State had ever seen, and he lived up there. And so they both said, you're crazy if you don't take a chance at this. This is one of the most storied programs in the history of college football. Now, you go back and look at that and you say, okay, were they? Well, the amount of national championships as they had won at Division II era, they were just moving to the Division I area. Had only been there for a couple of years. And so I went and interviewed with Coach Bull and said, I'm going to take this chance.
It was almost like gut instinct, wasn't it?
It was because I was going from a defensive coordinator to a defensive back coach. But I'm not an ego guy. Sometimes you got to put your ego on the shelf. Sometimes you just got to say, how am I going to learn more? I mean, there's different ways to do things, whether it's offensively, defensively, philosophically. And it was just time for me. And that was one my dad encouraged me to. And I was living in the same town as my parents, and they had their grandkids and stuff. And my brother still lives there. And I just said, this is something I need to do professionally. And they both said, my brother and my dad, you got to go. You have to try this. And so I went there in 2011 and had a magical season. In our first season there, we won the national championship. And Scotty Hazelton was our defensive coordinator.
It strikes me, some by choice, choosing to go to Northern Iowa, and some by just fate or chance, that you've been surrounded by really good coaches the whole time. Looking back, being in the same room with guys who have gone on to great success, and a lot of good coaches don't go on to success. They know what they're doing, they just don't get that moment where they move up the ladder. How much does that impress upon you, some of the coaching qualities that you need to carry?
Really impresses upon me in the fact of I'm a be where your feet are guy. Mm-hmm. I don't look at what's going to happen in 5 years. Where should I be at the next job? Where should I be? You just put your nose to the grindstone on a daily basis and learn as much as you can from the people that you're surrounded with, whether that's a head coach, whether that's an assistant coach, whether that's players, whatever it may be, and try to just gain as much knowledge, be a sponge as much as you can. And I think we all, Frost, myself, and Jerry, were all the same way. We all wanted to learn from each other because we all did it a different way. We all had different demeanors. We all had different ideas, but somehow it all came together. And so, I see both of them periodically, or communicate with both of them periodically, and we just kind of marvel about how young we were, but how much fun we had.
Yeah, it really is remarkable. You're D-backs coach 1 year, and then you're immediately defensive coordinator.
Mm-hmm. So
now you're like, I'm going to national championship, back to defense coordinator.
Yeah,
you got to feel like you've made exactly the right decision at that point.
Absolutely, because you always in the back of your mind you want to think, gosh, did I make the right decision? Although when I did, I said, hey, I'm going to move forward. If I make a mistake, I make a mistake, but I'm going to go for it. And it did. I was at the end of that season. Coach Hayes got hired by USC. Coach Bull came in to me and said, I'm elevating you. No interview, I'm elevating you to defensive coordinator. Appreciate it. Loved everything you did. Our defense improved, and it's your show now. And so to me, it was kind of validated, okay, the move I made was the correct move, but we're just coming off a national championship, I better not fall in love with this move too much, because I'm going to be put to the fire. We need to be pretty dang successful, because we had a number of guys returning from the 2011 team that expectations were going to be high, but it's one of those things where you embrace that target on your back and embrace the expectations.
What was Craig Bohl like to work for?
He was dynamite in the fact that Coach let you do your job. He was a real CEO, a guy that gave you suggestions, gave you enough leash to do what you needed to do, but you knew who was in charge. You knew he was going to make the final call, but never once did he question, why would you call this? Why would you do this? Just tell me originally why you're doing it. Great, we'll live with the results. And I so appreciate that about Coach. Is you never heard on a headset, you never heard at halftime or anything, well, should we do this more? Should we do this more? Chris, you've watched more video than I have. I trust your judgment. I trust what you're doing on this, and let it go. And I really appreciated that with Coach.
The final step of serendipity came in 2013 when you guys come down here. K-State's coming off a Big 12 championship, a really good team. Colin Klein has finished up his career.
Thankfully.
Yeah, he was pretty good. Turned over to another good quarterback, but it was his first game.
Yep.
An Iowa kid, Jake Waters.
Yeah.
And North Dakota State comes in here in a really good football game and wins. And this wasn't winning, with all due respect to a team like Kansas or this was Bill Snyder had it going again.
Yeah.
And you guys come in here and win on a late drive. And I always said that. I said it at the time. I said it, you out Snyder that game.
Yeah.
You got the ball, drove length of field, ate up the clock, won the game. And Coach, I'm not sure Craig Bohl's at Wyoming if he doesn't win that game.
Potentially.
And it set in motion everything that we've seen now. What do you remember of that win?
I remember spending the entire summer really dissecting Kansas State. We did it as a staff. I think Coach challenged us before we had our break in June and July. Make sure that you're spending some time on Kansas State. Let's make sure that we come up with game plans because we're going to have this thing game plan before we start fall camp. And so I watch film constantly on their offense, and the players make offenses go. The scheme's phenomenal, but players make it go. And then we're watching film on Jake Waters at Iowa Western, and we're doing everything we can. And then we came back to work like July 15th, and we took 2 weeks as if we were playing K-State and had it all mapped out by August 1st of what we wanted to do, because we knew that we had one shot. And this was not like we had beaten Kansas, we had beaten Minnesota, we had beaten Colorado State, but this was a different.
Right.
This was a different team. This was a phenomenal football team that coming off a Big 12 championship, and I think maybe that was a dedication to the stadium that day.
It was.
And so then we went through fall camp, and each day at fall camp we'd spend 10 minutes, 15 minutes on Kansas State up until we got to about 2 weeks out, and then we had everything laid out for it, and we knew we needed to play close to a perfect game. We really did, but we also thought we were going to be a lot more physical than some of the teams that we'd seen on film. And even though I know that nobody was going to overlook us because we'd won 2 national championships in a row, there's still an FCS team that ultimately will wear them down.
Right.
And I think just the opposite happened. I think we ultimately wore Kansas State down in that game with there's a number of guys on that team that we had in 2013 that was undefeated that are still playing in the league right now. There's good football players. Obviously, K-State had good players as well. And we got down, I think, by a couple scores, and nobody panicked. And that was probably I think the big thing is we got down 2 scores, nobody panicked. We all of a sudden got one of them back, and all of a sudden I think maybe the panic flipped to the other sideline a little bit. And next thing you know, we just methodically found a way. And it was the hottest game I've ever been involved in. And I didn't play. I was just on the sideline coaching my tail off, and I was drenched. And I can imagine how those kids were. And I'll never forget, we Our biggest thing at pregame meal was hot chicken noodle soup. Get the salt in you. The biggest thing at halftime was keep eating a little bit more hot chicken noodle soup to try to keep the sodium levels in you. You know, this is 2013. We'd never used to that. We were playing in 70-degree weather or inside in the Fargo Dome, and never had any hot games like that. And just everything kind of came together that day, and our guys had a big chip on their shoulder.
Craig Bohl goes to Wyoming. How much of a process was it with you and Gene and the hiring?
It was a big process because Coach asked me to go as the defensive coordinator, and I said, yeah, I'll go, because I didn't know if I'd even have an opportunity at North Dakota State to stay. And then talking to people really close to me in my circle, as a couple days passed, and we knew Craig was going to take the job for a few days, and then it kind of came out and stuff. And as I was talking to people in my circle, they said, why don't you approach Gene about being the head coach? And you know, I'm in the middle of playoff mode, so you're thinking more game plan and you're thinking all that stuff. And I sat home late one night and just said, you know what, I think I'm ready for this opportunity. But he's not coming to me. I need to go to him. And so I remember the next day I went and said, Gene, I know that you have a lot of good candidates for this job, but I'd be one that I think would be your best candidate, and I want to interview for the job. And we still were game planning for an option offense, which was terrible because we were game planning, getting all our option stuff ready. And then right after that game, he said, okay, I'll have you come over and interview after the game. And it was late one night, and stayed up an awful long time going through my thoughts and plans and vision for what I would be as a head coach. And I think it was like maybe a guess a week after Coach announced he was going to Wyoming that Gene announced my hire at North Dakota State, which was, everything was surreal, everything was great, but we still had a semifinal game to play, which everything comes back to this year as well as a championship game to play. And so probably that stressful stage of my life prepared me and helped me for this past year in another, stressful time of trying to do right by the people that have given you the opportunity at North Dakota State, as well as do right by the people that have given you the opportunity at Kansas State.
4 seasons as head coach, right?
5 seasons.
5 seasons.
Yep.
A lot of rings.
Yeah, pretty fortunate.
And then Gene Taylor comes calling again. And we will get into that and his hiring at Kansas State right after this pause on the Power Chat.